Good morning, and may the learning begin. My name is Jeff Shazinski. I'm with the National Center for Appropriate Technology. We also run a program for USDA called ATRA, or the National Sustainable Ag Information Service, which I hope many of you have used and will continue to use and will continue to support. I was lucky enough this year, in a very stiff competition this year, it seemed, to be awarded a grant by the Risk Management Agency on cover cropping as it relates to crop insurance. And through that grant, I made sure that both mine and Dr. Cavigelli's presentation would be at this conference. So I always like to say this in the way your tax dollars are ultimately being returned to you in this presentation, because I wrote the grant, the tax dollars came to me, our organization, and now it's coming back to you. And so you're the benefit of your tax dollars, which you should appreciate. Dr. Cavigelli, I have been working in crop insurance for too many years, 6 years now it seems, and I never thought I would ever do it that long, but he somehow got a hold of my name that somehow I knew something about crop insurance, and he invited me to Maryland to talk at a small conference somewhat like this one in Maryland that he runs and is part of every year. And I said, really? You really want somebody to come all the way from Montana to Maryland to talk about crop insurance? You know, I mean, I've given a lot of talks on crop insurance, and people always say this, you know, if there's concurrent sessions, which worries me here, and you never get anybody to come to the crop insurance one. I mean, I give the most entertaining lectures on crop insurance possible, but you still never get very many people to show up to your conference. So that's actually getting advertisement in here while I'm introducing that guy. But he was gracious to offer me the opportunity to come over there, and lucky because of our ATRA program and other things I could go. And it was I learned a lot. I learned about tomato insurance in Maryland, processing tomato insurance, which is a very interesting, really weird subject that you don't want to hear about. Michel Cavigelli, I have known his work for a long time, and anyone in organic agriculture who knows research in organic agriculture he's one of the, he's going to be overwhelmed by my graciousness, but I think he's one of the best top researchers in organic agriculture in the country. Unfortunately, he does it in the stupid part of the United States where it rains all the time. So I was a little worried that when he came out here, he might get nervous talking to dry land summer fallow folks and the systems that are out here that are so much different. And he said, well, that's not too much a problem because I did my master's at Kansas State University, so I've had a little experience with some of that. But his most recent research is truly based in a different ecology. So he has had to do his homework, and I've tried to help him, connect him with Perry and Klein and other people. And he's actually a graduate of MSU. Michigan State University. He gave me that this morning. Anyway, I'll let Michel talk more about himself in his program, but please welcome Michel Cavigelli.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Do I need to lower this microphone, or is this good? That's fine, okay. You guys don't want to see my face anyway, right? I'm here to talk about Risk Management Agency policies on tomatoes in Maryland. Is that what you guys are here for? No, okay. Hopefully it's a little more exciting than that. As Jeff did mention, I did do my PhD at MSU, and there worked with another MSU. I did a postdoc there too, and met another postdoc from MSU, who was also in this audience, who now works at your MSU, Fabian Manalid. And so it's great to see him. And thanks a lot for inviting me as well. It's great to see all you guys. As Jeff mentioned, I did try to do a little bit of homework to understand how things happen in Montana, and it's pretty clear that the primary limiting factor is water in terms of plant available water. And I'll talk more about that side of things, what I learned about Montana, more as a discussion leader than as a presentation in the afternoon. But for now, I am going to talk about production in an area where we do get a lot more water than you get. We get about 3 inches a month. Of course, it's not always 3 inches a month, right? That's the average. We had 7 inches in 2 days last year when a hurricane came through. And so it turns out also that we often have 1 month without rain in the summer, during peak growing season for corn, which of course is much more, requires a lot more water than wheat does, right? So we do deal with drought, and we have sandy soils that are drought prone, but still it's a different situation than here. I am going to lower this a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so I can see you guys. With all those caveats, I am going to talk about what we do in Maryland, and hopefully there's things that are applicable in terms of the concepts that are applicable to this part of the country, and we can certainly talk about that. And when Jeff suggested my talk title, he suggested organic research needs, and I stuck the word "and" in there, so my talk is a little bit of a two-parter. At the beginning, I'm going to talk about a long-term agricultural cropping systems trial that I'm in charge of in Maryland. And that's the research part. And then I'm going to talk about needs, which is going to be more talking about other projects that we've started, trying to address some of the limitations in organic production that we've identified in part through that long-term project. And there's hopefully more room for interaction with what works here and what works there and what some of the principles are. Okay, with that long-winded explanation, let me get started. If I can figure everything out. I might use the pointer. I'll probably use this screen over here, I guess, just because it's closer. This is my introductory slide that you probably don't need me to go over, but I will anyway, just kind of frame the talk. But in organic farming, as in any farming, actually, what we're doing is we're managing ecological processes, right? We're managing ecological processes to provide different things. Historically, it's just been a production type of situation where we're providing provisioning services. This is kind of the ecologist lingo that I'm throwing out there just as an introduction to some of the type of dialogue that's going on in agricultural circles. So we're trying to provide food production, which is considered a provisioning service. There's also regulating services that we're managing, including water quality, climate, pest populations, supporting services like soil retention, nutrient cycling, and cultural services, of course, right? Healthy livelihood, aesthetic landscapes, things like that. And of course, in organic farming, of course, we don't use synthetic fertilizers, synthetic pesticides, and no GMOs. But what we do need to depend on then very heavily are these other tools that have been around for a while, but that we still can improve on their management. Crop rotations, cover crops, animal manures, and tillage. Now I'm going to throw in some data right at the very beginning here. These are data from a study out of Illinois where Michel Cavigelli and some other researchers looked at the organic matter level in soils, and they looked at these long-term projects. There's only so many long-term projects in the United States that include organic systems. At this time, there were 9 of them. And you can see here that another Michel, female Michel, divided the organic systems into ones that are manure-based, ones that are legume-based. So in other words, these have legumes but don't have any manure. These manure ones might have legumes as well, but they are substantially different in that they depend on animal manures. And then they looked at conventional systems. And this is total organic carbon in the soil. And what do you see? You see that the organic systems have more organic carbon or organic matter than conventional systems. Not too surprising. And also more total nitrogen. Okay, so this is the basis of organic farming, right? This is in part why we call it organic farming, because we're building up soil organic matter. And there's been other analyses that have showed very similar patterns. But what's missing from this slide? This is the interactive part of the talk. The organic's been divided into 2 different sections, right? But conventional is pretty broad also, right? No hands? Before I get into that, you guys all know this probably. Soil organic matter has lots of benefits. It increases soil fertility. It's the reservoir for nitrogen especially, even for some phosphorus and some sulfur that plants take up. Stabilizes soil to help resist erosion. It can help control some pests. It reduces global warming potential, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Increases system resilience and resistance to perturbation. Jeff likes that one a lot because that relates to the insurance industry. Okay, but coming back to this, what's missing here? If we're looking at conventional systems, and we're looking, these are conventional till systems, that's a clue. There's no, is there much no-till in Montana? Yeah, okay, there's no no-till here, right? And we know that no-till is becoming more important in the US and Brazil and Argentina and Australia and a lot of places around the world. In the US, about 35% of row crops, or grains, I guess, planted to no-till in 2009, and this is increasing by about 1.5% per year. And no-till has a mean carbon sequestration rate. What the heck does that mean? Does anybody know what that means? Just raise your hand if that means something to you. Okay, good. Carbon sequestration, the concept of carbon sequestration is that in most of our agricultural lands, we've reduced the amount of carbon, and organic matter is made up about 50% carbon. So when I say carbon and organic matter, somewhat interchangeable. We also have too much CO2 in the atmosphere, right? So the concept of soil carbon sequestration is that we can put some of that CO2 in the atmosphere back in the soil where it belongs. It has a lot of benefits for the agricultural system, which I just mentioned for the soil organic matter benefits. At the same time, we're reducing CO2 out of the atmosphere, and as farmers, we should get paid for that because it's a societal benefit. So that's where the carbon sequestration piece comes from. It comes from the global warming dialogue, and at one point, there was a price put on carbon on the Chicago Board of Trade, and the idea was that a farmer, if they are sequestering carbon, in other words, if they're taking it out of the atmosphere and putting it in the soil where it can stay, that's called sequestration, which is completely different than other uses of the word sequestration when you work for the federal government, but let's not go there. If you can sequester carbon in your soil, then you might be able to get a government payment for that. It's essentially kind of some of the backstory to that carbon sequestration piece, because you're helping society. Anyway, so scientists for quite a while have been working to figure out how are we going to quantify that carbon sequestration. And they've done a lot of work on no-till compared to conventional till, but they've not done a lot of work in organic systems. And the reason that they haven't done a lot of work in organic systems is that you need to do research for about 10 years before you can get any sense of what's going to happen, because carbon in your soil changes slowly, and so you need a lot of time. What's your average research project last? Maybe 2 to 3 years. So you need a long-term project. Okay, so when you look at no-till systems, the mean carbon sequestration rate across the U.S. is, and this is in not in American units, sorry, but it's megagrams of carbon per hectare per year, which even if I put it in U.S. Units might not mean that much to you. But if you look at these numbers, there's a range, and this is what no-till does compared to conventional till. Michelle Wanda, who did that previous graph I showed, she did a calculation where she said the mean carbon sequestration for her organic systems in these 9 long-term systems, 9 long-term cropping systems, is 0.35 megagrams carbon per hectare per year. So you see that we're kind of approaching the low estimate for the no-till systems, right? Go ahead, Jeff.
Just a question. There's been an argument that some of these data, if you don't take the sample correctly, in other words, the depth of the sample, there's been some indication that organic systems would go lower in the profile.
Good. Okay, Jeff. Let me quickly repeat the question. The question is, Jeff is asking, he's basically saying it depends how far down the soil profile you go to look at where the carbon is sequestered. And historically, a lot of scientists would look at the top maybe 6 to 7 to 8 inches, maybe even less than that, and make these comparisons. And Jeff is saying, but if you look further down in an organic system, more of the carbon is down further. I'm not going to answer that quite yet because I have a slide to answer that for you, okay? But it's a good question, I agree. So the devil is often in the details in some of these things. Okay, but so Michelle used these long-term systems, and you're right, she did only measure down to, I think she did 6 inches. I had to send her samples for that study, but it was a long time ago, so I can't remember. Anyway, but the point, but there's another limitation to this type of comparison, comparing no-till. This is from a bunch of studies done in different areas in the U.S., maybe even in the world. And this is from 9 studies done in the U.S. What's another limitation? Why? That type of comparison has some limitations. Jeff says error bar, and in other words, there's a lot of variability in these data, so that in any given location you might get something different. In addition to that issue, there's also the question of where these studies were done. None of these studies involved comparing organic and no-till under the same situations, right? So there could be a bias where maybe these organic systems are all in really good locations where you get a high sequestration rate, or the opposite. They might all be where you might not get you don't know without really having a better understanding of where the data came from. And ditto with the no-till systems. Did I go backwards? Anyway, okay, so now that's by means of introduction to this long-term cropping system style that I became in charge of when I moved in 1999 to Beltsville, Maryland. So the project was started in 1996, so I inherited the project started by others. For the scientifically minded in the audience, we have 4 replicated blocks. We have all rotation entry points present each year. So that means if you have a corn-soybean rotation, you have one plot that's in corn and another plot that's in soybean every year, and then you switch them. So that in that 2-year rotation, you'd always have corn every year, right? That can become important for some comparisons. We use full-size farming equipment, and this is one of only 5 U.S. long-term agricultural research sites with both no-till and organic. So there's not even that many places where you can do this comparison. And it's the only U.S. long-term ag research site that has 3 different organic treatments. I think we now have a second one. But again, there's not that many different ones that compare different ways of doing organic. So I'd like to take credit for all that, but as I told you, I inherited this project. It was very well laid out, so I was lucky that way. These are the cropping systems, and I will talk to you a bit about what they are to give you a better understanding of the results that I show you later. So we have 2 conventional systems, a no-till and a chisel-till, or maybe conventional till in some people's mind. 3 different organic systems. One that is that 2-year rotation I talked about, very short. 3-year rotation and a 6-year rotation. All of our systems include corn. That's a tall plant that has, I don't know if any of you have seen that before out here or not, but it's kind of common in the U.S. And then we follow with a cover crop of rye, cereal rye. And then we have full season soybeans. So all our systems have those common crops. Our 3-year conventional systems follow with a winter wheat and then a double crop soybean. We're able to do the double cropping in our part of the world. And those 2 rotations are exactly the same. Among our 3 organic systems, we have a similar system here where we have the winter wheat, and then we go to hairy vetch, which is our legume cover crop here. In the short rotation, we follow the full season soybeans with the vetch, and in our 6-year rotation, we have the same as our 3-year rotation, but we throw in a perennial crop, alfalfa. So differences here, summer crops only in terms of harvestable crops, summer, winter, summer, winter, and then perennial. So we're increasing the complexity of the rotations as we're going along so that we can ask questions about the impact of that rotation complexity on how the systems perform. I'll go through some of the typical management because it'll probably be different because we have something called corn, as I mentioned. Okay, so for nitrogen, we depend on either the vetch or the alfalfa plow down. We also use poultry litter. There's a big poultry industry on the eastern shore of Maryland, and so there's a lot of poultry litter around. We apply it at relatively conservative rates of about 2 tons per acre, and we do base how much we apply based on how good a vetch or alfalfa crop we got. We do use a source of potash, OMBLE approved K2SO4, potassium sulfate. I think that probably makes quite a difference in our situations. And we use traditional organic plowing methods, including the moldboard plow, and we use a rotary hoe and cultivator 2 times. Our soybean management is very similar, except of course we don't need the nitrogen source. And then for wheat, we also apply poultry litter in the fall at planting, which is something we might have to change because of nutrient management regulations, but this is what we've been doing. And we prepare a seed bed with disking and field cultivator, but of course, once it's planted, we don't do any cultivation. And typical management for organic, we try to get 5 cuts out of our alfalfa system, so we actually add a lot of potassium sulfate to try to get that. We use the top growth in the spring to plow down before corn as opposed to harvesting it. So in other words, we're growing our own nitrogen as people do with legume cover crops. The vetch cover crop, we use tillage to kill it. After soybean harvest, we plant it after soybean harvest in the 2-year and in mid-August in the 3-year rotation. So here we're planting in about October and here in August. So you see there's a different management for the different systems. Yes, in fact. The question is, do we have any problems with alfalfa going back in our corn? We don't with a moldboard plow. We do have one of the farmers that we work with that has a similar rotation that uses a heavy disc, and he gets a little bit that comes back. He says he doesn't think it's a problem just because it's not using that much moisture and it's not competing that much, and he figures he's getting a little more nitrogen during the growth of the corn. And if you see his field, it's really not that much. It's not, and he cultivates through it and kills a lot of it too. So. We do use a no-till drill to plant our rye cover crops in all our systems. Typical management in our conventional systems, we consult with the University of Maryland on what their latest recommendations are, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to mimic what farmers do across the state. So for our organic systems, we meet with our organic farming consulting group at least once a year. So we have this is actually a fairly conservative nitrogen application rate, and we use phosphate and potash based on soil testing. And in our no-till systems, we use more herbicides than we do in our conventional systems. Pounce is an insecticide for corn that we sometimes use if needed. We haven't had to use it in a while. For full-season soybeans, again, we apply fertilizers based on soil test results, and we use both Gramoxone and Roundup as herbicides. Do I need to define what herbicides are for this group? Just kidding. And we also use Gramoxone as a pre-plant, and we use fertilizers in split applications. So these are really best management practices for conventional systems. Harmony is I don't know if you guys, if that's used here too, is a herbicide for wheat. And in our conventional systems, we do harvest the straw, and in our organic systems, we put the straw back into the ground. So that's a fundamental difference in organic and conventional, right? Where you're trying to recycle your nutrients in the organic, whereas in the conventional, you're not too worried about that. Turns out when I first moved there, the straw was worth more than the grain because the price of wheat was $1 something a bushel. Okay, so these are 5 systems, as I mentioned. I'm going to focus some of the results, just to make things simpler, just on the no-till and the organic, in part because there hasn't been that many comparisons between no-till and organic, and because a lot of our organic results are somewhat similar. So if we look at our soil organic carbon, remember the graphs I showed before, where the organic was higher than a conventional till? Well, lo and behold, it turns out we actually have more carbon in our organic, and we have it the same in all 3 of our systems than no-till, which kind of surprised me, because what determines how much carbon stays in the soil? It's kind of like a bank account. It's how much you put in versus how much comes out. How much you put in is based on your management, in terms of your applications of manure, that's carbon, right? All your plant residue has carbon in it. So that's your inputs. That's your inputs to your bank account of soil carbon. And your outputs are much harder to measure because there's bacteria and fungi and all that in the soil continuously eating that stuff and releasing it back into the atmosphere as CO2. Well, a certain proportion of what you put in stays in the soil. It's a pretty small proportion, maybe 5 to 10%. Most of it goes right back to the atmosphere. That's the carbon cycle in miniature. But some of it stays in. So the question is, are we putting more carbon in our system here, in our organic fleet here, than our no-till? I don't have a graph to show you that, but it turns out we don't put more in the organic system. You'll see later we have higher yields here, so we have higher crop residue, so we have putting more in the bank. And the other thing that impacts the rate at which that carbon comes out, tillage facilitates that, improves the activity of the bacteria and the fungi, right? You're putting oxygen in the soil, you're breaking up the residue. Tillage should increase the rate at which it comes out. So what did I tell you just now? I just told you that in theory, the organic system should have less carbon than the no-till system. This is down to 1 meter, 3 feet, 39 inches. So it's not that we're not looking deep enough. And we also know that in the no-till system, what's happening? All that carbon, where's it going? We're not tilling it in, right? So it's falling on the top of the soil, and that's where it's staying, if it's staying. In the organic system, we're plowing it down, right? We're using a moldboard plow, 6 to 8 inches probably, and then doing a bunch of other tillage. So if we look more closely then where that carbon is staying, this is soil depth, and this here is in metric units, and this here, I've got the inches listed here, and this is 0 to 1 inch that fell off the map there somehow, I don't know what happened. So you see the red is no-till. In the top 2 inches, yes, no-till has more organic matter, and that does have some benefits, right? It improves water infiltration, it helps reduce erosion, because that's where the action is for those 2 processes. And so that you do get more there, but as you go down the profile, you get a lot less, because this is where you're putting the organic matter in the organic system, and that's where it happens to be staying. Well, what's down there? There's more clay there. Clay and organic matter like to bind together, and that helps keep the organic matter there. And so basically you're distributing that same amount of carbon over a deeper depth profile. And because of that, you're getting more carbon. That has benefits for the farmer, for the production, but also has these carbon sequestration benefits that, at least when you live close to DC, you hear a lot about. So this was interesting. This is some of the first, people have looked at this with conventional till systems, but I think this is the first time that it's been shown that organic systems increase carbon at depth, compared even to a no-till system. And remember, we do a lot of plowing, which is supposed to be the worst thing for carbon sequestration. And what does this mean? This means that we get more soil nitrogen mineralization. I mentioned that organic matter is a reservoir for nitrogen, and in organic systems, this is really what you want to be building up, right? Because you can add a legume every year that can give you some release of some quick nitrogen, but you don't have other quick sources of nitrogen generally, and so you have to build up your reservoir of slow-release nitrogen, which is what this is. And you can see that that is what has happened in this situation as well. So what benefits does that have for corn grain yield, or for wheat grain yield in this part of the world? These are our plots here, so they're long skinny plots. And what we were able to do one year is we carved out a little piece where we didn't add any nitrogen inputs at all that year, no fertilizer in the conventional systems, no legumes, and no manures in the organic system. And we grew the corn as we did for the rest of the plot, and then we compared the yields in those areas with no nitrogen inputs that year. And what do we see? In our organic system, no nitrogen inputs. This is about 160 bushels per acre, which is not bad considering no inputs. In our conventional systems, 7 megagrams. What's 70% of 160? You guys do that, something like that. This is not a good yield, right, for our neck of the woods. So by building up these organic matter pools, and this is relevant wherever you are, we can do it maybe faster than you can because we have more moisture, we have more plant growth. We also have quicker decomposition rates. And we'll talk more about this afternoon in the cover crop talk. So part of the answer for us is that we do use our animal manures. We don't know what this would look like if we didn't use the animal manures, the poultry litter, but that's certainly part of the situation. As I understand from Jeff, a lot of people here might not have access to animal manure, so you might need to think a little differently about how to get to that point. This is a graph that, or table. I got till 9:15, is that right? I get the whole morning. You want me to keep talking? 9:45? Oh, okay, then I'll go over this. Good. Sorry, guys. This is not a back of the envelope, but something you could do on the back of the envelope, but we have some data from our long-term site that we include in this. This is an assessment of the global warming potential of 3 of our different cropping systems. Does that mean anything to anybody? Raise your hand if global warming potential means something to you. Okay, the hands come up. Okay, good. I'm going to walk you through what that means for those that don't have any clue what the heck I'm talking about. I kind of hinted at it a little bit in terms of the soil carbon sequestration, right? If your soil carbon increases, if your soil carbon bank account increases, all that carbon came from the atmosphere. It's the only place it can come from. It came from CO2 that was in the atmosphere through photosynthesis. Right? That's what plants do. They fix CO2. They take it, and they make it part of their bodies. They die. They put some of it back. Some of it stays in the soil. And so if you're increasing your soil carbon level, that's a good thing. That means that you have a negative global warming potential. In other words, you're helping mitigate climate change by having a negative global warming potential, okay? On the other hand, there's other ways that agriculture contributes to global warming by using fossil fuels and by releasing nitrous oxide, which is another greenhouse gas. CO2 is the biggie, but methane and N2O, nitrous oxide, are the 2 other ones. So if you want to do an accounting of how different cropping systems impact climate change, this is one of these things that scientists do that might be of less interest to farmers, except in that at some point, if you can mitigate your impact, you might get paid for it. That's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's something to keep in mind. So we do these calculations where we look at all the impacts of farming on climate change. So I have chisel till, the no-till, and this is the 3-year organic. I've only done it for these systems so far. This is the change in soil carbon. We saw the graphs there. And our system had been no-till when it was established in 1996. So we assume that the no-till actually hasn't changed in soil carbon levels since the beginning of the experiment. So that's why this number is 0. Okay, so no-till hasn't changed. But our chisel-till system, I didn't show you the data, but that has less carbon in the soil than our no-till system. So this is the classic story. What people show is that no-till helps build soil organic carbon. So this positive number is a bad thing with respect to global warming potential. And I showed you that the organic system is accumulating carbon, so it has a negative impact on climate change, right? So that's what that negative number is. And I also told you about nitrous oxide is a greenhouse gas. We do some extensive measurements on that. And so we have data for these 3 systems. And it turns out that our organic system actually produces more nitrous oxide than our conventional systems. So those 3 numbers there. And this one is statistically higher than this one, but this one's in between. And if we look then at the CO2, I guess I should mention this too. This is in CO2 equivalents. Each molecule of CO2, so we're counting the molecules of CO2 kind of coming out of the system. And I explained that with a change in soil carbon, but the N2O is put in that same unit because each N2O molecule is worth 298 CO2 molecules because the N2O is a more powerful greenhouse gas than CO2. So if you accumulate, let's say you are able to suck out 297 molecules of CO2 and store it in your soil, but in doing that, you release one N2O molecule, that's worth 298, you're still losing, right? You've accumulated 297, but you've let 298 go. So that's what this CO2 equivalent means. So this N2O has been transformed into CO2 equivalents. Energy in lime, energy is in CO2 equivalents also how much CO2 you burn to plant, to till, to produce and manufacture fertilizers. And it turns out that that last thing I mentioned, that's the big difference between organic, which you would think might have more energy use because you're having to till more often, but the real cost of energy in agriculture is fertilizer production and transport. That's about 30% of energy use in the U.S., of agricultural energy use in the U.S. is for fertilizer manufacture and transport. So that's why these numbers turn out to be higher than this number. And it turns out these kind of all end up being a wash. When you add all these up, the highest global warming potential is for a conventional till system, medium level for no-till, and look at organic, it actually has a negative. So that means that it is a net accumulator of greenhouse gases in a good form, in a form that is not going to be, it's net taking greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. Okay, it's a good thing, right? A few caveats for these numbers. One is that the energy use here, we assume that we are not transporting our manure very far, because we have a lot of poultry litter on the eastern shore of Maryland that gets transported to the next farm, basically, because there's a lot of manure nearby. So once you start transporting manure significant distances, which could be relevant in Montana especially, then this picture would look a little different. So this is a case study of our site. Different sites are going to give you different numbers. Jeff?
Isn't that a strong case for reintegrating livestock with cropping systems?
The question is, isn't that a great argument for reintegrating livestock into cropping systems? Yeah, sure. Go ahead. The question is, why does the organic have higher N2O? The reason is, if you look, this is for these are all 3-year crop rotations, right? During the corn phase of the rotation, when we're adding poultry litter versus fertilizer in the conventional systems, we actually get very similar N2O during that stage. During the wheat phase, after we harvest the wheat, in the organic system, we actually get some pretty big pulses. So this is kind of a negative aspect of building up those nitrogen pools in the soil when we don't have a crop on the soil, which is what happens after we plant wheat in our rotation. All that available nitrogen can be lost in different ways, and this is one of those mechanisms. This N2O production happens in our soils when it's wet. When it's wet and when there's available nitrogen around. And so that's what's going on. Turns out then during our soybean phase, when none of these systems get nitrogen added to them, we actually get more N2O from our organic systems than we do our conventional systems. So you kind of add up those pieces where things are higher in organic than in conventional. So that identifies areas where maybe we could improve. Maybe we want to put a summer cover crop after our wheat before we put our fall planted legume, which would have other benefits as well. Weed control, increased soil carbon. So what we're trying to do with this project is mimic what farmers do and also learn from it how there might be places where we can improve things. So yeah, good question. Okay, I'm going to leave that complicated table full of numbers. Hopefully it made sense. So let's talk more about organic farming and no-till. There's very few data on the impact of organic farming on soil erosion. One of the earliest studies came out of Washington State, actually, with probably a climate a little more similar and an agriculture more similar to here, but the Palouse regions are probably a little hillier. And John Reganold there found that an organic system had a deeper depth to argillic horizon, so just a deeper topsoil than a neighboring farm that had been conventionally farmed. And you look at this and you say, oh, so it's less soil erosion in the organic farm. And it turns out the primary reason for this is because, and this is what Jeff wanted me to talk about, it's because of cover crop use in the organic farm and no cover crop use in the conventional farm. So this is not so much an organic versus conventional comparison, it's really the impact of cover crops on reducing soil erosion. And so this farm, they're both wheat farms, and the organic farm included a pea cover crop over, this is between 1948 and 1985, they were able to do that comparison. So this is over a long time period, which is also what you need to do to look at soil erosion, because that's a slow process that eats away at soil slowly. So this basically could say cover crops and soil erosion. Is that good? Does that meet your, So we looked at, that's an actual measurement. It's harder for us to measure soil erosion. Part of the reason there's not many data on soil erosion is that's just very difficult to measure. We don't need to get into why that is, but just accept that. And then, so what we can do is we can use these models. This is called the Water Erosion Prediction Project Model, which was developed by the Agricultural Research Service, the people I work for, and was developed to be used by NRCS, but it turns out they actually use a different model, but that's a whole other story too. So we applied this model to our conventional till and our organic flea systems, and look, woohoo, we had less soil erosion again. Very similar story to the previous slide I showed, and it turns out because this model, you have to input all your management practices. We know from that the only difference, the real reason that we're seeing this difference in our organic is cover crops. All right, thank you, Jeff, for that. And so you remember in our organic flea rotation, we have cover crops in both these systems. We have rye following corn, but we have an additional legume cover crop in our 3-year rotation. So that's what's making this difference. So that was good to see. But then what happens? Well, if you look at no-till, no-till is better at reducing soil erosion. Having said that, these models were not developed for use of cover crops. They were not developed for organic systems. And when I showed these data to the Maryland organic farmers we work with, they're like, along with the NRCS state agronomists who ran the data for us, they weren't too happy, and they were saying, yeah, the model doesn't work for us, which could be. And so the models do need to be looked at closer, and the only way to improve these models is by using these long-term data sets. And so that's one thing we're hoping to do is work with NRCS to improve how these models work for these more complex systems with cover crops, animal manures, and well, those two things that haven't been incorporated in these models as well as maybe they could. Go ahead, Jeff. Why, especially with the no-till. So that's another criticism. Jeff is asking, what is it, these models, you actually do a lot of inputs and you can kind of assess what factor is really leading to the different results. And I'm not an expert on these models, but my understanding is that the models favor no-till as an important factor. Tillage is a huge factor in facilitating erosion. And so some people argue, both scientists and some organic farmers, that the models don't really model what an organic farm tilled soil is like. And that could be. And because we know we have more carbon in our soil, even though it's further down, that could have impacts on how the soil responds to erosion events. I'm not a soil physicist, and so I don't want to say stuff that I don't know too much about. Well, that doesn't always stop me, but go ahead, another question.
I hate to dig too deep into this, but I'm curious, in the soil erosion models, you put in tillage and you get out a negative result. But the ones I'm familiar with, there's no difference between tillage followed by a cover crop and tillage followed by just leaving the surface bare, which in the real world, obviously, there's a huge difference there. So is that true in this model as well? Is there accounting for following your tillage with a cover?
And again, I probably can't answer that question without more of a hearsay answer to it. My understanding is that in part because there's not these long-term data sets on cover crops, any modeler has to use real-world data to make their estimates of, like what you're saying, the impact of a particular practice on the output they're trying to model. If you don't have the data, you got to do your best guess. And the best guess could be off, more so than data could be off, for example. And so my understanding, both talking to the modeling people and, well, the modeling people, the more important people here for this conversation, is that no, they don't have really the data for the cover crops. They don't have the data. Animal manure, maybe, I don't know that story as much, but yeah, definitely is much less data on cover crops, yeah. So there's a need for that. There's a need for getting also the data we have to NRCS. NRCS is very interested in improving these models, and so again, this is not being used by NRCS at this point, this model, but that's the same question. I'll show data from NRCS's model in a later slide, and it's an issue for any model. Yeah, it's not too deep for me, the question. Okay, so that's a soil erosion picture. This is then a different model used by colleagues of mine, actually, who was my boss, John Teasdale. I don't know if any of you know him. He did a lot of work on cover crops in Maryland. So a postdoc that worked with him. They have a long-term project where they had a reduced till organic system and a no-till conventional right next to each other, and they applied a different model. And they found that reducing the tillage in organic brought it to the same level as the no-till system. So it does point that there's room for improvement in organic as well, right? Maybe we probably should be trying to reduce tillage where we can. We'll always probably be using it because weeds are going to be an issue at some point in the rotation, right? I could be proved wrong with that, that's fine. Okay, so what about organic farming and food production? On average, go ahead, Jeff.
I'm sorry, but do you consider using the EPIC model, or EPIC model in your work, rather than the one you chose?
Yeah, Jeff is asking why didn't we use we could have, he stated it much nicer. He said, you could have used the EPIC model in your work, right? And the reason we didn't choose the EPIC model is that the Webb model is developed for measuring soil erosion, and so we really wanted to focus on that. The EPIC model is not as mechanistic, so it's less, there's less, you can understand less why it would work or not work, and so that's part of why we didn't use that. Yeah, it's a good question, which model you're going to use, but we'll leave that discussion till later, the minutia there. On average, when you look at the data from around the world, really, corn yields in organic system are about 85% of what they are in conventional, soybean about 93%, and wheat about 87%. And these are calculated from a couple different review articles looking at this issue. I think that's all I want to say here, but I want to get more into why that is, and you probably are all very familiar with some of these issues. There's a long-term study in Wisconsin that includes conventional and organic systems. And so they have a really nice paper where they talk about corn grain yield as percent of conventional and soybean yield as percent of conventional, organic, both organic, looking at all years in their long-term study. And they found that corn grain yield was 90% of conventional if you look at all years together, and soybean 85 to 90%. If you look at years with a wet spring, which is about a third of those years, Wisconsin, your yield goes even lower in organic. You only have about 3/4 to 80% of your yield, of your conventional yield in organic systems. This obvious to everybody here why that would be? Just because in these summer crops, spring is when you're doing your weed control. It's when you're planting, it's when you're coming back with a rotary hoe, with a between row cultivator, and killing those early sprouting weeds. If it's wet during those times, those critical times where the soil needs to be able to move with your instrument, you're not going to be able to get good weed control. Or you might not even be able to get in the field, right? So this is the cost of a wet spring. If you look at years without a wet spring, in other words, when you got good weed control in the early growing season, you see that yields become much more similar. So this points just to another area where we need to target, where we need to improve organic systems if possible. Of course, we're not going to change the weather, at least not the way we want it to. And so there's some real challenges here, but I'll talk later on in the second half of the talk more about needs, and future research will address some of these things. So what have we learned so far then? Organic farming compared to no-till. Looks like we can increase soil organic matter to improve soil fertility. There are phosphorus concerns. I don't know if those are big issues here. They probably are. We've decreased global warming potential, but we're not reducing soil erosion compared to no-till. We have lower grain yields. I haven't shown you data yet, but I'll show you some in a bit. We do have increased labor in organic systems, certainly compared to no-till. But we also have increased economic returns, and I'll show you that in a bit. So this second part of the talk then, what have we learned? Well, how can we improve systems based in part on what we learned from our long-term system? How can we improve organic systems? And I've got 3 different categories here. Increasing crop phenological diversity is the first part I'll talk about. Then I'll talk about manure management and reducing tillage. So increasing crop phenological diversity is just using the same research project and focusing on just the 3 organic systems. We've done the research to look at how this different crop phenological diversity impacts some of these things we've been looking at. What crop phenological diversity just means that what I said at the beginning here, we have summer annual, summer annual, summer annual, summer annual, but now we've thrown in winter annual. So these have different crop phenologies, summer annual versus winter annual. And then a perennial is even another phenology. So we have more diverse phenologies here, less diverse phenologies here, right? So increasing crop phenological diversity actually improves corn yield. I hope that's visually visible, to be a little redundant. Over the long term, when we look at our good years, and by good years I mean our non-drought years, and it turns out even in Maryland about half our years are drought years. So looking at the potential of the systems, in our conventional systems we get about 150 bushels of corn, no difference between our 2 no-till and chisel-till. But in our 3 organic systems you'll see that they're both lower yields than our conventional, but that there's a stair-step pattern. The shortest rotation has the lowest yield, the medium rotation a little higher yield, and the longest, more phenologically complex rotation, corn yields are higher than in our shorter rotations. Still not as high as our conventional systems, but still reasonable long. This is a long-term average, right? So some years a lot better and some years not quite as good. Why is that? A primary reason is that we get better weed control because of this phenological diversity. In a system where we have corn and soybeans every year, the weed control is at the same time every year, right? Before planting, at planting, and after planting, we're trying to control those summer annual weeds. But every now and then, we have those bad wet years, and you get some bad weeds, right? That gives you a lot of weed seeds. You don't really have a respite from that because you always have a summer annual crop that you're trying to grow. Once you throw wheat into the system, the wheat, of course, you're planting in the fall, it's winter wheat. It comes springtime when all those summer annuals are germinating and coming up, they're outcompeted by the wheat. We really don't have big weed problems in our wheat. We get yields of about 90 bushels per acre, up to 90 bushels per acre. So it's a very different situation than here. The wheat is very competitive. And then when we harvest the wheat, if any of them happen to make it through, we're cutting them off before they can set seed, right? And then we're planting another winter annual hairy veg at that time. So we have less weed cover, percent weed cover. This is the mean of 6 years. These are data that John Teasdale, the weed scientist, collected. And then when we throw alfalfa in the system, another phenology, where now you have a perennial, you're cutting it to 5 times a year. Any summer annuals that are making it through, they're going to get cut off before they go to seed, and so you're reducing weeds even more. So this is probably the biggest advantage to this phenological diversity. When we look at how that impacts corn yield, what John Teasdale and his colleagues did, again within these long-term plots, they took a small area, they hand-weeded any weeds that came out, and they compared the corn yield in that wheat field section right next to the major plot where there was whatever weeds came up, to look at the difference in corn yield between those two. So that way they can see the impact of whatever the weed population was that year on corn yield. And they found that we lost up to 35% of our corn yield potential just due to weeds. Right, so that's a substantial amount in our shorter system. And then in our longest system, we're still losing some to weeds period on an annual average basis. Some years the corn is very clean, but some years not so clean. So we still do lose some to weeds. But even in our no-till system, we had some issues with some herbicides, so we even lost some yield to weeds some of those years. I think we've improved that now. So big impact of weeds on corn yield. In the early part of the rotation, before we had built up all the soil organic matter pools, we also had some nitrogen limitation in corn. Corn has high nitrogen demand, and when you're growing 150 to 200 bushel corn, it has even more nitrogen demand than when the yield is lower. Because we've built up our nitrogen reserves in these soils, we probably don't have nitrogen limitation anymore, and I'll show a slide later that shows that. Well, you saw that we had 150 bushels of corn where we had no nitrogen additions. Those are data from 2009, so that was once we built up those reserves. Okay, so this is the one economic slide I have, I believe. Increasing crop phenological diversity also reduces economic risk. Our risk management agency folks here, this is for you. So what is risk in this case? Risk is the variability from year to year in your economic returns. So it's how much variability you have in that. Let me show you first what the whole graph means, though. These yellow bars are our returns in our conventional system. We don't get any organic premium, of course, so that's the returns that we get. In our organic systems, of course, we get organic premiums. That's what the blue bars are. I just have the yellow bars in there just to show what the impact of that premium is on your returns. So it's obviously very important to get that premium. I don't know of any organic farmers in our neck of the woods that don't get those premiums on a regular basis. But if you look at the numbers on top of that, the plus minus, that's a measure of how variable that number is. In other words, it's a standard deviation, but that's just a measure of how variable your returns are from year to year. So the smaller the number, the more consistent your returns. The higher the number, the more erratic your returns on that system. So you'll see here that in your 2-year organic rotation, you have a very high variability. A good year for corn and soybeans, a good year for corn is a good year for soybeans. A bad year for corn is a bad year for soybeans often, because those yields are largely driven by both the weeds but also by rainfall. I told you earlier that we have many summers where we have 1 month with no rain, big impact on yields. The only thing we're selling here is corn and soybeans. So we're only selling summer annuals, we're only selling 2 crops that respond to weather very similarly. Once we throw wheat in the mix, we rarely have a bad wheat yield because we're not drought limited from wheat. I don't think we've ever had that. We just have enough moisture for wheat. So we've stabilized our returns by making the rotation more complex with a different a crop with a different phenology. And then when we throw alfalfa, even a completely different phenology. It's a perennial. We're getting if we in a dry year we might get 3 cuts, but we still get 3 cuts at different times of the year that are impacted differently from corn, soybeans. And so it's just a matter of not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? It's a classic economic argument. Go ahead, Jeff. Kind of your input costs. Yeah, so Jeff is asking about input costs. This is a measure. Net returns is how much it costs you. It's how much you got in from selling your crop minus how much it costs you to produce it, right? So Jeff is asking about that second piece, how much it costs you to produce it. The organic system cost of production is a little lower than conventional, but there's not much difference. The real differences are driven by yield differences. It's really the returns, the income in that drives these differences. But there are some small differences. We use, this includes, there's some things that are not included in here that make this a more complex story. If you're gonna own equipment to harvest alfalfa, of course, that's a whole nother cost, right? We have those costs incorporated in that we used custom rates from the University of Maryland, so that it has the depreciation cost and some of that capital cost in there, but you still didn't have to put out that initial capital cost. So there's some kind of artificiality to it that way. But at the same time, we're selling much less corn here than we are over here. And so, I'm not sure where that thought was going, but go ahead.
I guess what I was really thinking about is often.
Yeah, Jeff is arguing that there's a human capital investment because these systems require more management skill, organic systems than conventional. I would definitely agree with that, and our farm crew who does the management would definitely agree with that. That is not measured in this. And there was a good study that came out of Minnesota showing this kind of thing where you do get higher yields per acre on an organic system, but that your average organic farm is smaller than your average conventional farm, just because you can't cover as much ground, especially during that early spring planting and weed management period of the year. Whereas if you plant Roundup Ready beans, you plant and a little later you spray and you're done, right? So you can cover a lot more ground. An organic soybean situation requires a lot more labor. So there's differences in scale when you add these numbers up. Go ahead.
Just quickly on your 3-crop alfalfa and your 5-crop cutting alfalfa, what's your yields in terms of tons per acre?
Yeah, that's a good question. I should know that number off the top of my head, but since we don't compare the alfalfa, we don't have a comparison with another system. I don't have that embedded in my head here. I think we're at about 6 tons per acre. The goal with a 5-cut system is supposed to be 8 tons per acre, and so we never get to that. I worked with the University of Maryland forage specialist to develop that goal, and it's something I need to revisit. But yeah, in a dry year we're down to 2.5, 3 tons. So, yeah. Okay, this is we're still on the increase in crop phenological diversity, right? It improves soil fertility. I showed you the slide with the corn yield being higher in the organic than the no-till when we added no nitrogen that year. We had similar results for our other organic systems. And I also showed you a graph where we had potentially mineralizable nitrogen, which is how much nitrogen the soil might release in a given year. And I showed you that our organic 3-year system was higher than our 2 conventional. Well, I showed the no-till, but they're higher than both the conventional systems here. Well, our other organic systems also are higher. We're getting more nitrogen release. This is just what the data look like if you're interested. But we're getting more nitrogen release, but we're also doing it with different management. We're getting the same nitrogen release, but in the organic 2-year, we're applying manure every 2 years, once every 2 years. We're applying it every time we plant corn, right? In our 3-year rotation, we're actually applying it more often, 2 out of 3 years, because we're applying it for corn and wheat. And then in our 6-year rotation, though, we're applying it quite a bit less, just for corn and wheat again, but that only comes around 2 out of 6 years. Since we have a big phosphorus issue in our soils out there, we want to minimize the amount of nutrients we get from poultry litter or any manure so that we don't build our soil phosphorus levels up too high. In fact, when we started this project, our soil phosphorus levels were too high, so that's why I tried to use a conservative rate of poultry litter, and it turns out our phosphorus levels are coming down despite the fact that we're using these poultry litters. So we're exporting more phosphorus in the grain and alfalfa than we are putting back into the soil. So that's a good long-term goal. That's more the case in our 6-year rotation than in our shorter rotations. Our shorter rotations, we still have some issues with soil phosphorus, so we're going to look at trying to reduce our manure even less maybe there. Just to show you, I guess it's a little redundant, but this is again the corn grain yield where we had no nitrogen added in those microplots that 1 year, but showing all 5 systems. Again, our conventional systems, lower yields than in our organic systems. But just to show you that also we're getting higher yield potential in all three of our systems, even in those that we add less manure to. That's kind of the point I want to make, is that adding less manure and reducing our soil phosphorus values is not hurting us in terms of corn yield. Okay, one more, I think, for crop phenological diversity. We talked about N2O before. We actually have data for more years than this now, but our conventional systems tend to be at about 1 kilogram of nitrogen per hectare per year. That is about the same as, we're only losing 1 pound of nitrogen, that's nothing, right, per acre per year. It's about the same as 1 pound of nitrogen per acre per year. But in a global warming perspective, this is significant. It's not important in terms of nitrogen loss for your crop production, but it is important in climate change issues. And here's our data for our two short systems. We're getting not quite twice as much N2O loss, but we're getting more, and we talked about that earlier. But then in our long system, again, we're bringing that down. So just another benefit for these longer crop rotations. Okay, I lied to you. I got one more, I think. This is the soil erosion measured using Russell II. This is the actual model that is used by NRCS in their assessment of soil erosion. And so we got help from the state the state agronomist running this for us. Just look at our three organic systems. We have lower erosion in our long rotation than we do in our shorter system. So the model does seem to model that very well. I don't have the conventional systems on here. They're actually quite a bit lower, but I think that's a problem because I'm pretty sure that in our 6-year organic system, we have low soil erosion like we do in our no-till system. Remember, 3 years of this are no-till in essence, right? Because we have a perennial crop that doesn't get tilled. Okay, so improving manure management. Just a little background about manure management. I just have 1 or 2 slides on this. In manure, the plant available nitrogen to phosphorus ratio is about 2 to 1. What does that mean? That means there's about twice as much nitrogen as phosphorus with respect to what plants need, right? So if you apply 1 unit, if you apply your manure to meet your nitrogen needs of your plants, you're going to be adding twice as much phosphorus as the plants need, right? So over time, that can be problematic because if you're always matching your nitrogen in your manure to your crop need for that year, you're going to be building up soil phosphorus because you're not taking it off in crop yield, okay? In compost, kind of have the opposite, even a worse situation, in fact, where if you're matching meeting your nitrogen needs, you're adding even more phosphorus. Compost reduces the amount of nitrogen in soil in manure by composting it, but the phosphorus isn't going anywhere. But the nitrogen is leaving through volatilization. Most crops have a nitrogen to phosphorus ratio of 7 to 1 to 10 to 1. So in other words, they need a lot more nitrogen than they need phosphorus. When you're depending solely on animal manures, you're adding too much phosphorus. That's the story I just want to tell there. And so what we really want to do is try to maximize nitrogen inputs from legumes to minimize animal manure nitrogen needs. Because when you grow a legume, you're not adding any new phosphorus, right? It's all new. The nitrogen's new because you're fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere, but you're not adding new phosphorus. You might be increasing phosphorus availability a little bit, but it's not new phosphorus. And so that's where this is cover crops, another cover crop slide for you. And so one thing we're looking at is side dressing manure during the growing season. This is pretty, not standard practice for corn in the East, but it's best management practice for corn in the East, is to apply the nitrogen in a fertilizer form traditionally at about a month after you plant the corn, because prior to that, the corn doesn't take up much nitrogen, but after about a month, it really sucks it out of the soil fast. So if you apply it at side dress, at V5, when the corn's maybe a foot tall, you're applying it when the corn needs it. You're spoon feeding the corn, right? So what we tried to do is apply those same principles to side dressing manure. And using poultry litter has a fair amount of ammonium, which is readily available, and so this might work pretty well for that. And so we had a postdoc, John Spargo, who's now at Penn State University, excellent agronomist doing this work. And there's a lot of data here. Let me kind of walk you through it. We have the pre-plant manure and the side dress, or nitrogen forms applied pre-plant, which is a traditional time to apply manure, it's easier to incorporate, and then applying it at side dress. This is ammonium nitrate, this is poultry litter, this is pelletized poultry litter, this is feather meal, which is another byproduct of the poultry industry in our neck of the woods, and this is a blend of poultry litter and feather meal. So these are all things available to organic farmers to use. So what do we see? Corn grain yield here, sorry, it's in megagrams per hectare again, but this is about 160 bushels per acre. You'll see that we actually didn't get a difference just using ammonium nitrate between the pre-plant and the side dress. With the poultry litter, we didn't get a statistical difference, but with the pelletized poultry litter, turns out we actually got more corn when we side dressed the manure than when we pre-planted it. And the same for these two forms of organic nitrogen. So that's surprising. And if we look at the amount of uptake of nitrogen by corn, very similar pattern. This is the minimum requirement for corn, really. And so you see that with the side dress, we are actually feeding the corn, spoon feeding it better than if we put all the nitrogen down at planting. So this is very exciting results in 2009. I have to mention this is also following a cover crop. We had a legume cover crop, hairy vetch, prior to this. And unfortunately, the results from 2010 are much less exciting in that pretty much similar response for all these treatments. So some years it does seem to work, and so we need to look a little more closer why that is. But this is all done with some of these new subsoil applicators of manure. I don't know if people have been experimenting with those here. The one we used was developed by USDA ARS in Arkansas to apply poultry litter subsoil in fescue pastures. And it turns out it works very well as a side dress applicator as well with some tweaks. Do you have a question?
Does the poultry litter have arsenic?
Does the poultry litter have arsenic? Less and less. It's a good question, though. The poultry litter does have arsenic, and we've been using it on the long-term side for years, and when we look at the arsenic level in the soil, it's still below any level for concern. But that is definitely a question. My understanding is the arsenic is released from roxarsone, which is an organic compound that includes the arsenic. And my understanding, again, I'm not positive this is true, but that they've stopped using that. And there's news just this week that FDA is going to reduce it's not going to, it's antibiotics, this is an antibiotic too, but I guess that's not one used in human feed, but the FDA is going to not allow companies to sell antibiotics that humans use for subthreshold use in animals, which is a side issue, I guess, but I don't know the arsenic question that well. There's certainly arsenic in the poultry litter we're using. I don't know if it's an issue based on soil test results. So, go ahead. Yeah.
Have you ever done any work with foliar feeding?
I can't hear you.
Have you ever done any work with foliar feeding?
Have we ever done any work with foliar feeding? We did one year, and it was a disaster. I am by no means an expert on that. We used fish emulsion, and I think we applied it 4 or 5 times in a year that we had bad cover crop growth, and it didn't seem to have much impact. I'd have to go back to look at how that year was to give you a better answer to that. It was much too expensive for this scale of production is what we decided based on that experience. And we added quite a bit of nitrogen. I think it was, I can't remember. We added a substantial amount of nitrogen. Go ahead, Jeff.
This team is very promising and thought this is a good idea for
So Jeff is saying that this looks like a really good strategy for the Chesapeake Bay area because the biggest pollutants in the Chesapeake Bay, or the most important nutrients, are nitrogen and phosphorus. Some of it comes from agriculture, some of it comes from development, of course. And so Jeff is asking if NRCS has picked up on some of this. One of my colleagues, Stephen Mursky, is working more closely with this piece of equipment, and he's in communication with NRCS about a lot of his work. And I'm sure NRCS knows about it from it being used elsewhere, further south as well. I think we still need a little more work to see how we can use it effectively in organic corn. But NRCS is definitely part of our dialogue circle, in terms of a lot of this. And NRCS is very interested in cover crop use and in reducing manure, of course. Okay, I don't have too much time left, and I'm getting to the part that is the most exciting, reducing tillage in organic systems. But this is good. I appreciate you guys asking questions, because I don't have to leave time for questions. This next section is going to be, and it's the last section, is pretty much all the work of this colleague I mentioned, Stephen Mursky, who is trained as a weed scientist and a soil scientist, who's been in our lab for 5 years. And he's looking to reduce till in organic systems using a cover crop-based organic rotational no-till grain production. That's a big mouthful, but it's definitely a system that is completely dependent on cover crops and managing the cover crops in a more sophisticated way than has been managed in the past. So, of course, since we don't have herbicides and we don't want to use tillage in these systems, what do we need to do? We need to use cover crops. We need to plant them in the fall in our part of the world. We need to have a legume prior to corn so that we can get the nitrogen from that, and a grass before the soybeans to help reduce weed populations. So we want to produce a weed suppressive mulch. So we want a thick, fairly heavy stand, and we're going to mechanically terminate this in the spring. What does that mean? That means using one of these guys, one of these roller crimpers. Have you guys all seen this type of thing? I know folks have used them in Montana. Yeah, Perry Miller's used some of this stuff. You can mount this on the front or the back of the tractor. We have mounted on the front and plant at the same time. This is a standing rye crop with the soybean planter going through it, planting in 30-inch rows. And this is what it looks like after it's been killed. This is a veg crop that's been planted with corn in the same way. Stephen is working a lot of the minutiae and the details on how best to do that. And for supplemental weed control then, when you have that mulch that I should show you here, this veg mulch can decompose quite quickly. This rye mulch will form a good weed mat basically for a lot longer. It takes a long time for it to decompose. So the soybean system's been more effective than the corn system so far. And in the corn, you often need another pass to get weeds between the row especially. So he modified this system that was developed, I'm blanking out where it was developed, this in between row cultivator that has a wheel here that makes a slit, and then this is a sweep that's underneath the soil at about an inch, and it comes along and it just lifts everything up and disturbs those weeds that might have germinated and pushes it back down. And so you have a somewhat traditional looking sweep that's buried under the ground so that you're not disturbing the surface. So this is equipment that was developed more by no-till type folks. What else do I need to tell you about that? It doesn't invert the soil, as I mentioned, and it has to be tweaked so it doesn't drag the residue. That's especially can be a problem. And by using these methods, compared to the traditional organic system, the system that he's developed with this 3-year rotation with hairy veg, corn, cereal rye, soybean, and wheat, he's gone from 25 tillage operations to 13 during the course of this rotation. So obviously still going to have some tillage because of the weed situation. You do need to have some of that. The yields from this system so far, from a number of experiments, if we look at the corn yield, these are the yields with a measure of variability. If you compare it to the county average, some years okay, some years not so good, some years decent. The soybeans are a little closer to county averages, getting better soybean production in this system, and that's largely because the rye does a better job of weed control. The vetch doesn't necessarily provide all the nitrogen that a corn crop needs, and it does decompose faster, so there's some challenges there. There are also some pests and planting equipment issues. And because of this inadequate nitrogen, though, I talked to you a little bit about that side dress nitrogen applicator. Stephen's looking to incorporate that into the system as well. to make up for perhaps some deficiency in nitrogen from the veg, to give you a little side thrust boost of manure. And so he's working with other ARS scientists from Auburn, Alabama, who have developed this system. And this is the same system used in that previous study I showed. This is a prototype that Stephen had built. And so he's coming through right after, I guess you do this before the wheat cultivation that I just showed you. And the idea then is to provide the nitrogen in synchrony with corn needs, as I described before. This has been developed for other manure types than poultry litter, and Stephen's trying to adapt this to poultry litter. So the point of this is to show that what we need to do also to improve some of these organic systems is to look at the conventional world and see what they've developed. Especially in the no-till world, they've done a lot of engineering that could be applied to organic systems. And then finally, I actually have a fourth way that maybe we can improve ecosystem services provided by organic systems, and that is with improving all our cover crops. These are the cover crops that we use more. You guys have different ones. We need some more winter hardiness. We need to increase nitrogen fixation rates, flower timing, because mechanical control depends on being able to do it when the crop is flowering. If you do it too early, the crop's going to come back. If you do it too late, the crop might be too stringy, and so the timing becomes important. So if you can change the flowering time of your cover crop varieties, then you can tweak, you can match your cover crop with your equipment needs. And then also looking at biomass accumulation. Stephen and another colleague, Jude Mall, have spent a bunch of time looking at hairy vetch accessions from all over the world, looking at the diversity of hairy vetch that's out there, growing them all out at Maryland in different locations, and assessing which ones are best at winter hardiness, that are best at all these things, and looking at the variety that's out there, and just quantifying that so that then people that are going to breed these cover crops in the future, which I think we probably need to improve a lot of systems, different characteristics for different parts of the country, so they can take this information and use it in breeding programs. And they've done a fair amount with hairy vetch. They're now starting to work with crimson clover, and they're going to be working with Austrian winter pea to characterize the diversity that's out there, which we don't have that information. We need to start treating our cover crops like crops, not just like cover crops where we match them to the exact situation the same way that we do a wheat crop, a corn crop, and all that. And I think that's going to open up different avenues to the biological potential that's there.
Principally to do with water.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. And we actually have some of those issues as well. In a dry spring, we'll want to terminate our cover crops earlier too. And yes, thank you. That's a good one to add here. There's different regions will have different characteristics they're going to shoot for. Right? Go ahead.
Do you have anyone looking at pollination services off of cover crops? Because many of those are flowering.
I don't know if we do in Beltsville or not. There are some entomologists we work with. He's looked at pollination for chia. And he's working more with home gardeners to develop more pollinator-friendly garden species, but not that I know of. Yeah, it's good.
I'm really interested in how we can use pollination on a larger scale than just these small.
And that's when people talk about these ecosystem services, which I introduced at the beginning. That's a huge ecosystem service that I didn't address. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, and frankly, I did my master's at Kansas State University, as Jeff mentioned, and the big thing I learned there is that cover crops reduce the yield of the succeeding crop because they use water, too much water. Of course, that was in the late 80s. I didn't have the sophisticated understanding that most of you guys have of the importance of that. But since then, Montana seems to be leading the way with Perry Miller and Clayne Jones and their students and postdocs and whatnot on developing these systems to better match your needs. And it seems to me, this termination timing is crucial. And you're going to have a trade-off. We try to get as much nitrogen as we can from our cover crops, but we can spare the water, most years. You guys have to do a balance between how much water you're going to use and how much nitrogen you're going to get. And as the woman here mentioned, as your growth curve accelerates, you're not only getting more biomass, which is good for soil organic matter, you're getting more nitrogen, but you also, it comes at the cost of water. That's the way plants work, right? And so you need to make a judgment call on how much nitrogen you can get, because you can't lose too much water. Yeah, and I'll have some slides this afternoon that I just pilfered from you guys, from the Montana State folks, showing that some crops you want to, cover crops you want to kill early bud stage, for lentils from Canada, whereas with peas here, you want to do it in bloom stage, you don't wait for the pod stage, just because of that trade-off between nitrogen and water. So that's, you guys seem to be leading the way in a lot of that. Then on top of that, so this is another issue, is that we probably need to take advantage of the yield that's out there, the variability that's out there in breeding programs to improve cover crops. And because the no-till people are really interested in cover crops now, maybe there is the impetus to do more of that at this point. I'm going to stop right there because someone's making signals at me.